Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. If you are wanting to be part of the business and organization spotlight, please reach out to me at sarah@journeyforjasmine.com or send me a message on any of my social media accounts at journeyforjasmine. Today I am talking with Maegan. She was told she had a miscarriage during the first trimester, only to later learn it had been a mistake and her son was still alive at 20 weeks. Unfortunately, her water had broken and she had to say goodbye again. Maegan talks about going through the loss of her son not once, but twice, along with the anger and frustration she feels about the lack of care she received. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Maegan. Maegan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Maegan, and I'm based in Gresham, Oregon, a little bit outside of Portland. And I'm a lot of things. I wear many hats, mostly in the arts, design, and I kind of left a full-time job of 9 years at a print shop as a designer to do some contract work and freelancing, focus on building up a small business, and then also just being a little bit more flexible and available as that schedule allows to wrap around the current day of life. Yeah, I'm happy to be here and at least share maybe some good moments, and of course ones that are maybe not so good, but at least I think through all of those we find connections somehow.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think even though sometimes it's hard to talk about the subject, I think it's helpful for other people to hear what we've gone through, to know that, they're not alone.
Mm-hmm. And even the fact that, at least, kind of what I was told, at least by healthcare, is that you're not alone, but you can have so many experiences and stories to listen to and still feel alone, because at least they all happen a little differently. And then, of course, the way we perceive them, how they've either blessed or destroyed our lives and all that. So we find out that there's still so many differences, but yet because it revolves around a similar core, I suppose, that we're able to connect, but then learn there's, it didn't happen exactly the same as A, B, or C. And so from it, we walk away with having learned something. It was a new experience for me, not one that I looked forward to having, but considering I'd been pushed out of I don't say I was in a bubble, but just it was a very unexpected, very discomforting on so many levels experience and I've also never done something like this today. So it's one of those lemons to lemonade things, I think, is continuing to, in his honor, push myself to do things the hard things, the ones that you don't necessarily have to do, but you can grow from. And so this would be one of them.
Well, I'm happy to have you here today.
Yeah, thank
Do you
you.
mind sharing a little bit about your story?
Yeah, and so as I kind of mentioned earlier, the pretty timeline base, and kind of just swallowed the whole experience as it came at me. And it's a couple of turns which had left me confused and angry and all the things. And of course, didn't see any of it coming. So and time's flown too. So starts back in January of 2022. So going on about a year and a half. And I'd found out I was expecting, and my partner has a son that's 10 years older than, or 9 or 10 years older than my son. So we each have one. And then, yeah, we were expecting, which was a surprise, but it was like, okay, let's do this. I mean, for lack of a better word, it was just kind of like we were focused kind of on careers and just trying to keep our families going and stuff like that, to the each that we have. And we were growing together, but then I figured, well, then there were five, I guess, total if we became a blended family. And so we just kind of, well, I took a pregnancy test at home just because I was like, are we sure, and it was positive. So I went in and made an appointment, and because I couldn't be seen until I think it was 9 weeks, if I remember correctly. And I was only like, well, it was about a month. So I waited. We kind of took in this new thing that we were going to experience and tried to plan for it. And while I was waiting to be seen, and it was kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, it was exciting. It was new because it'd been a long time for either of us to really start from zero, and like all the things you have to get and all that. But I think already having, it was going to be easier to try to weed out what we just really didn't need as kind of a little bit older adults, 30s and early 40s. We could think that, there's just so many things we don't need, and, keep it simple. And so there was kind of a blessing to that. We're like, oh, okay, you really don't need like 35, 40, 50% of the things that you receive, although they're nice, but you just become so overloaded. And we were looking at trying to, at least at the market, to buy a home. And, that would be enough room for all of us. And because we each just live in apartments. So I went to my first ultrasound on the 23rd of February. And that was really bittersweet. It was just like, he couldn't make it that day because of work or an appointment. I can't remember at this time. But my mom went with me, and she was just like, I'm going to be a grandma. And, it was just quite surreal. And everything was normal and good. They printed out a couple of pictures and I brought them home. I was like, yeah, I just can't believe this. And it's so cool. And they got me scheduled for another appointment. I think it was a month later, if I remember correctly, March 23rd. So it was like, oh, okay, we'll just continue planning. And somewhere in the second week of March, I was cooking dinner here at home, and it was kind of one of those late nights because I had done a couple of jobs that day. And so it was probably, I'd say 8:30. I was fixing dinner, but I was like, I'm going to do a casserole. So at least then to not have to do that the next couple of nights. And I went to pull it out of the oven, and my son Jacob says, Mom, and I was wearing like cream colored sweatpants that day. And he says, Mom, you're bleeding. And I'm like, what? And I went to go look, and like my pants had kind of like saturated in blood. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I just started panicking, and I was crying for whatever reason. I don't know. It was just alarming to see that. And I just sat on the bathroom floor crying. And I called my partner, and I was like, oh, I hope he answers, And to this day, I kind of don't remember if he did right away, or I had to text too. I think I had to reach him because it was kind of probably a gym time or something like that. He has a couple of activities after work. And so, but I did get a hold of him within a few minutes, and it was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't near the phone. And then I said, we just need to go to the hospital. I think, it's like you go into a blurred sort of state of mind. And so we dropped my son off with my grandma at the time. She's since passed, but she was watching him for the night. And so we got to the hospital around 10, I think it was. And we didn't leave there till like 3 or 3:30, that I remember correctly, because we went into the emergency room and then waited for all the ultrasounds and stuff like that they wanted to do. And when we were in there, it was still like bleeding and stuff, but nothing hurt. That was the thing. The whole time, nothing was hurting. They're like, do you feel any cramping? Do you feel this? And it's like, no, I don't feel any pain. And they're like, well, that's good. That's usually a good sign. And I had never felt that kind of sensation before, just like this kind of gushing, really. But during all of the inside and outside ultrasounds, they said that the like heartbeat was still very normal. He was moving around in there. Sorry, spoiler, it was a boy later down the road. Anyway, it's moving around, and they just said, well, these things can happen. It's just something you kind of just have to wait and see. And so they didn't admit me. They just kind of diapered me up and sent me home. And they're just like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And this can happen at home unless you're having like severe complications. There's no reason for us to keep you here. And there was like some sort of hope, I don't know. I mean, I just figured, well, I don't have any other reason to think otherwise. I mean, this is just bleeding, but I don't think that, I mean, it's not over, right? You're just like, okay, it's a little bump in the road, but it's not over. So I wasn't quite feeling distraught yet. It was just like a little confused and like, what's going to happen, but it'll be just fine. It's going to be fine. And then it's like, my partner's holding me and squeezing my arm and like almost popped the IV out of it. And, I just appreciated for being someone who's very sensitive to like blood or just hard moments like that in general. And of course, unexpected too. I admired that. Like, I can't even express how grateful I am for him to be there and in that way. And, I was scared. I was just like, I don't want to look. I can't pull my pants up. I can't put this diaper thingy on, Mm-hmm. And he's like, I'll do it for you. And so I felt like a 90-year-old woman, just kind of losing all my ability to do things. And there he's helping me to just be comfortable, as much as humanly possible in that moment. And we got in the car and went home, and I just arranged to stay with him for the weekend so that my son didn't have to see me go through that with whatever was happening. And I, rather than just pick him up and take him places as that happens, I figured let's just give it a couple of days. And so I was grateful to have that help. I still didn't feel any pain, and I was kind of, bleeding off and on. And then I started clotting, like with these, like, they'd be like very small plum size clots that were kind of plopping out every now and then. And I think there was only about 4 over the course of the weekend, but it was odd too. So yeah, by this time I'm like 3 months long. And because this is like, 3rd week of March or 2nd week of March. So we would take walks. I just tried to keep, like, they wanted me to lay down, but then I realized that, there wasn't much bleeding happening when I laid down, and I got happy about that, but then realized once I kind of stood up more that gravity and it all just kind of came out more. And I was like, oh man, I'm not sure what's happening. But so from Friday to Monday, because Friday was the ER, Monday morning, I called and made a same day appointment with my doctor to be seen and, just see like, what is it that I'm going through, or what are these things that have come out? A couple of them we did save in a Ziploc. And I also thank my partner very much for that too, because a couple of them came out and I just couldn't bear to look. I was scared because I was like, well, I don't know what I might see, And so the couple of them that we could save, he was kind enough to do so and clean me up and shower me and all that stuff. And I didn't feel alone for sure. And so then when we went in for the appointment, it was the doctor that I'd been seeing. And this is the hard part, is that when we brought the bags in, little baggies, and then explained, how our weekend went, she looked at one of them and said that it was a blood clot, it was just clearly a blood clot. And then the other one she's looking at, and she says that, I'm sorry you've had a miscarriage, because in this one, there are materials of conception. And so that was like ingrained in my brain, and then it was sort of like, here's, there's going to be counseling available as you may need it. And we just don't know why these things happen. And I didn't realize that, of course, later, you want to research everything, not right after that moment, but later on in the year,
right?
Find out that is such a common thing to say and how impersonal it is. And even went into the because of course he asks, and he says, well, what about this or that? And it's, well, it could be a chromosomal problem, or it could be the low counts, or anyway. So it was just presuming that there may be a problem with him as well, in some case. And he's like, but that's okay. Just these things kind of come at us, these assumptions. And it was like, So we left. So she asked if we wanted to like bury those, knowing that one of them was our baby, at least to our knowledge at the time, and or if we would like to leave them there to get them sent to a lab. And we said, well, we both live in separate apartments at this time and we won't be there forever. So we kind of just don't have somewhere consistent to bury it. So if we could find out something, I guess we're okay with that. I mean, it was a hard decision to make, but I figured maybe it could tell us something. And so I kept, since this was the second week of March, I was told to keep the March 23rd appointment, but not for the next ultrasound or prenatal. It was going to be a follow-up to that, and that hopefully they could look me over better once things had progressed, and we'll be looking at it as a follow-up to a miscarriage. So I kept that appointment. And when I got there, my bleeding had lessened since the week prior, but they did not do any exams. They did not do any blood tests, nor did they that day, because if I was still bleeding, and said, well, it's no point to do anything today. Your levels will still be all, your body doesn't know what's happened. But of course, I was seen by somebody else that on the 23rd. And so I still never had any tests done. It was more, how are you doing? That counseling's available, and I'm thinking at this time, I'm just processing, and I have, my mom or my partner to talk to. And I think right now that's enough, because they're going to be the ones that understand what's all been going on better than just what someone could read out of a book or, and, I just thought, well, it's just kind of undoing all the thoughts that you kind of, or the plans, and that, I think that's the hard thing, that moment. And so anyway, we finished up and it took a whole hour, and I even asked, I said, am I not having a blood test or something? And I say, well, we just don't find it necessary. You're presenting well, at least better than last week. And so, it looks like your body has handled or taken care of the miscarriage. There was no ultrasound, there was no nothing. Up till that date, the only time I had blood drawn and an ultrasound was February 23rd. And that's when everything was just fine.
That's crazy to me that they
point,
wouldn't even do any testing.
Well, and I wasn't as bothered by it at that time, just because I wasn't sure what protocol would be in that. I just know that what's happened to me, and I've never done this before, and like, oh my gosh, so I kind of didn't, I mean, I thought it was strange, but I didn't know for what reasons. I just wasn't reasoning enough, I guess, at that moment. Or yeah, I just didn't know anything about it. I mean, I just figured, well, they know what they're talking about, and I do feel better, only to find out later that that's something that's kind of required. So anyway, it was like, and these appointments weren't simple, and they weren't quick, and they weren't easy, but that's kind of the gist of how that one went. And then scheduled another one more follow-up in June. No, wait, sorry, my dates are a little off. March. Oh, there were no more. That's right. They said to schedule one if you feel like you need, services, or, you feel like you're not healing well still, or something comes up. So anyways, March 23rd, April, May go by, and part of May goes by, and, I don't say I feel fine, but, it was just sort of like, all of that was kind of behind us, and we're just having to swallow this big thing in bite-sized pieces and kind of find a new normal again. We've just went on this roller coaster ride a little bit, and I was finding that my pants were getting a little bit tight, and I was feeling like kind of bloated, feeling like, I mean, I know I've still got the appetite that I had. I want to eat all the time, and I still have to use the restroom a few times, and but I never did feel sick ever during it. I think I just had like a metallic-y taste, which was odd. I never did get sick, so it wasn't like an indication of anything, even when things were good or bad or anything. So, and I was still not feeling like sick even then. It was just, I felt full. I felt kind of bloated and a little bit just uneasy. But I was like sleeping on my tummy and just everything, as per usual. And I First week of May had a little bit of spotting or bleeding or whatever, which was this kind of 6 week mark from the second week of March, of when they said that probably a cycle would start again, and it'll be irregular, but it'll start around that point. So that made sense. It kind of came and lasted a couple of days and went. And I was like, oh, okay, it was just alarming because the last time I saw blood, it was, when we were losing, I guess at that time, I thought we're losing our baby, or I'm not sure what's going on. But this stopped, it came and went. And I said, well, I guess that means it really is over, because, I'm now, I mean, that's proof, right? You're having a cycle. So it's not there anymore. And then after it finished, I was always working, but I found myself working till about 7 one evening. And then I went to go pick up my son, and I parked, and I got out of the car, and I felt a warm gush. And I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I just ran from my car. I flew into the house. Grandma says, how are you? We've been fine. I said, hold on, I'm going to the bathroom. And I was so scared. I just imagined blood everywhere, and there, nothing. It was clear. And I said, oh my Lord. I said, well, but what's that? It was just a clear fluid, and it wasn't all over the place, but it was a gush. And I thought, well, that's so strange, but whew, glad it's not red. And it was just kind of like dripping, and just kind of, it felt like it still was coming, but it wasn't like a faucet. And I thought, this is just strange. And so, but they had, I try to go back into my mind and not panic and go back to the emergency. And they said, well, they did tell me that my body is going to clear things, because I was 3 months along, and when I lost it, and I was going to go through some irregularities. And so I waited a little bit to see, as long as it wasn't tinged, there was nothing coming out, like that, I should be okay. And it's just my body going through things. Maybe I shouldn't panic, I mean, there's no baby. So as far as I know, so Tuesday I called because it was still coming through. I said, this is lasting longer than like a period. So, I've got to have it looked at. They said, we can see you next week. And I said, no, I don't think so. I've already waited a couple of days. I'm just not sure. I've never had kind of fluid, coming out. And it's not pouring, but I still want to know what that is. Or if I need some kind of treatment, who knows? They said, well, we can see you in a couple of days. I said, okay, fine, I'll take that. Whoever's available, I'll take it. Because it wasn't alarming to see, and it was just clear. I just went with that as opposed to emergency room. I just didn't see what they could do, and I wasn't in any pain. And so anyway, I showed up to that appointment, and this is now May 13th, and it was a Friday the 13th. And I don't really believe in that, but I just thought it was very odd. And I said, well, this certainly is one of those days, I guess. And made the appointment, and I explained, because it was not my doctor, I explained what I'd went through, what I'm going through. I feel full. I feel all these things. And my blood guy, he says, Maegan, can you pee in a cup? I said, absolutely. I've felt the need to do that over the last few months anyway. And, it's easy to do, sure. And so anyway, I do the test, and he comes back in the room, and he says, it's still positive. And I about fell off the chair or the bench or whatever it is. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, it's still positive. Hold on a sec. Your doctor's here. I'm going to go get her. And I'm just like looking, because there was 2 or 3, they were like students, and then a resident or something like that. There was a couple of individuals in the room. They're always asking, is it okay if, this person looks after you, but I'll be in here to monitor them. They're like a practicing clinic, I guess. So my doctor comes in, and she's like, verifying, yeah, your test is still positive. I'm going to pull in a little ultrasound machine and have a look. And I'm just like getting goosebumps. I'm just like, what? 2 months later, and knowing how we've processed this grieving, this first round of roller coaster of emotions, I'm thinking, am I alive? Am I dreaming? Just what's going on here? And she brought the machine in, and there's something in there, and it's huge. She's just like, or I was questioning what I was seeing, because I thought, well, last time I saw it, it all fit on the screen, right? It's like 3 months. It was very small. And she says, no, that's the brain inside the head. The rest of the body is off of the monitor. Like what you're looking at is just the head, pretty much. And I'm like, no way, you're kidding. And she's like, and heartbeat is still 162 beats as it was back in February. And I'm just like, I mean, I can't remember clearly now exactly. I can't feel the emotion again exactly the way it was, but I was just like, what do you mean? I mean, what can't, what's going on?
Hey, yeah, I'm sure it was a big
And
shock.
because it was still, I mean, there was nothing wrong with it. It was alive. She says he's moving, and it's moving in there. And I'm like, okay. She says, you're measuring at 20 weeks. And I'm like, no way. And she says, but I'm going to have a look inside and find out what this leaking is, where it's coming from, or whatever. And so when she looked at the cervix, she says, your cervix is still closed, but I do see some fluid around it and stuff. So I'm going to make some phone calls and have you go to the hospital from here. They'll be able to help you out in the labor and maternity. Or labor and delivery. And I said, oh my gosh, like, what? I mean, she says, yeah, the heartbeat is there and everything. And I'm just like floored. I said, well, I feel like there's something wrong here, but okay, we're going to go to the hospital. And I'm getting all these congratulations from my regulars that are there, blood lady that time and everything. She's like, I mean, congratulations. Now you get to go buy baby stuff and this and that. And I'm like, but now I'm so behind. I mean, we've only got 3 or 4 months, like what? I'm still just shocked. And I called my partner. He was working until 7 or 7:30 that night, but this is about 4:30 or close to 5. And I said, I'll call him anyway. And he's like, so what you're saying is what? And it was sort of like I had to just say it. And then he's like, no, I still couldn't believe it, because I mean, here we'd been processing what had happened to us a couple months ago. And then I said, well, anyway, you can meet me at the hospital, when you're done. But of course, by the time he got there, around say 7:30ish, I had already been there and gotten seen by the two doctors that helped me initially when I got up there, and they tested the fluid and had said that it was amniotic fluid. And so while the baby was all right now, they gave me the only choice of not leaving that hospital until he was born, by either inducing with pills or going into a surgery room and having him sucked out, in which case they made it very obvious that he would not come out whole, which was very alarming to me in the choice of words, because I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, are you kidding me right now? And I said, well, I don't know. Laying in that bed, I said, well, I don't want either one of them. They both sound awful and I don't want them, and it was like, but because I waited a couple days. Apparently my water had broke when I felt that initial gush, and that was now 5 days ago to this point here. And they're like, you're pretty much at risk for, I mean, 3 days is kind of like our cutoff for having had your water broke, and that you're not getting some interuterine infection, and that can compromise like your entire uterus and stuff like that. And it will be harmful to the baby anyway. There's no way that you can keep him inside, like that. And so, I mean, I don't know anything at that time. They're just like, it could be fatal too. This infection can run rapid eventually. And so they're like, we're going to admit you to a room and get you on antibiotics. And then he needs to come out. It needs to come out. And I just chose induction. I said, I don't like any of them. And so I got admitted. I was very, very, very scared. And I just looked at that bed and thinking, I don't want to get in it, because that means once I get in it, the only time I'm getting out of it is when he's really gone for good. I was just like, man, I thought we already said goodbye, and not that I was done saying goodbye, but here we are now, having found out in the last 24 hours that he's still there, but now we still don't get to keep him. And he's actually going to be like born, not just come out in some as clots, which it still was very meaningful for us at that time. But, I felt like I left them there with the clinic. Well, come to find out too, because it was kind of curious. Those obviously weren't our baby before.
Right.
And because, it turns out they got lost. My medical record, they got misplaced. Now I'm thinking, where's the person, anybody in that clinic that can say, hey, we've lost these. Can you come in for this, or this test to verify that you are indeed, or to back up that you have had a miscarriage, right? So I never did have a miscarriage. I'd carried him the whole time since March. I was not seen between those dates because there was no baby to look after. There was no prenatal vitamin to take. There was no folic acid to take anymore after March because, like they said, you've had a miscarriage. And of course, I, as a grieving person, and I don't have any habits like, drinking or smoking anyway. So it's not like I took those up again or even took them up in general for having went through that. But I probably treated myself to ice cream or something like that. I mean, we generally eat pretty clean, well, for the most part. And then, and so I'm sure that he had some sugar. So I'm thinking, And afterwards, I'm like, so you're saying that there's nothing you could have done differently? Oh no, even if we'd known that you didn't have a miscarriage, there was nothing that we could have done to avoid this. And I'm thinking, well, how not? I mean, I know I'm just here, just a patient in a hospital bed, but how can you tell me that? And they say, well, just these things happen or whatever. And it just blew me away. And so, I went through that night. This is May, 13th and through into the 14th. He was born that next morning, and my partner took him in the arms and, put him up on my chest, and he only moved a little bit. And then it was just like, wow, in the aftermath too, everything came out, and he was just wrapped up, and they said, well, it's a little boy. And all kinds of emotions, of course. And then, they said, but, you're going to have to plan what you want to do with it later, and him later. And it was a wild, wild experience. And so afterwards, or later that day, I decided to keep him with us, knowing that, well, when we leave this hospital, we have to leave it anyways. And I decided, if this is our time, actual time to say goodbye, I want to keep it here. I'd never imagined going through that or even choosing that, or I just never ever could have imagined that for myself. I mean, for anyone else, but it's like when you actually go through it, I'm like, wow, usually it's just a story you hear or whatever. And not that those are fun stories to hear by any means. It's just, I couldn't imagine all the thoughts we went through, expecting, nope, you've lost it. I don't feel all great right now. Let's go have it looked at. Oh, you're having a baby. What? And then now to be at that moment, I just said, how much can one person take?
Right.
And of course, there were still never answers from it. My doctor did visit us in the hospital later that evening, which I'm not sure if that's normal. But she says, I can't stop thinking about you coming in yesterday to the clinic and us finding that baby there. And I'm thinking, you're surprised. I mean, you have a license.
Right.
I'm surprised too. And it was just like, and I was holding him in the blanket too while she's talking. And she just says, unfortunately, it's experiences like this that we learn as doctors. And I'm thinking, it's 2022, not 1950 or whatever. I was like, I just can't see that you missed that. I just can't understand. It's a simple lack of doing. They had all the tools available to help me, but they were not offered to me when I supposedly lost my baby. We're going to look at him with our bare eyes and say, this is it, this is, but I thought she knew what she was looking at, I mean, I trusted that. And then I also trusted that they were going to go have those tested. And it all never happened. And for her to say, even if she strongly stood by it, even if we'd known that he was still there, there's nothing you could have done differently, and neither could have I. And of course, from that day on, I researched like no other, from all kinds of sources, all kinds of what ages do babies live? What can you request? What can you try? What do you have rights to? And it was just like at 20 weeks, and it's well, let's see. Yeah, at 20 weeks, or even at well, no, okay. So when you have a miscarriage, here's what you're supposed to be offered. Here's what's supposed to be done to verify. It's supposed to be a very, very like not tedious process, but it's supposed to be, I mean, there shouldn't be no mistake. They have to make sure for your own well-being too, that everything has cleared out of your body. Whether or not that your baby is truly gone, but that you're okay too after it, because anything that gets left behind can be a risk to you too. I was never checked over from March when I'd had, no, actually from February when I had my first ultrasound till when I was threatened miscarriage timing in March. That was the last time I was checked for anything. I wasn't then checked, poked, or prodded until he was found out to be there, because I went to go get checked. Between then, he had no care. I had no care. Therefore, he didn't. I was grieving, so I was also in a poorer state of being than as just having been normal and still carrying a baby. I mean, I just went that long without knowing at all that there's a baby there, getting care, any of that. And I said, if I'd been just a high risk pregnancy as opposed to having had a miscarriage, wouldn't there have been a ton of options open to me? I mean, we do live in America, right? Supposedly. So, I mean, I feel like that shouldn't have been a rocket science. You just go to a high risk doctor, you have bed rest, whatever it is. I would have been happy to be on bed rest for 6 months. I mean, not happy to do it, but I mean, whatever.
Right, yeah, to have the option.
Yeah. And I'd say, I would have done anything for that baby. But of course, no options. And so they stood by themselves and said that even if they'd known, it was still going to happen. And I'm thinking, well, how are you so sure of it when you're so unsure as to why these things happen? Just in medical in general these days, the things that they do have answers for are truly amazing. And then the things that they still have yet to find answers for, I'm not so sure about it. Well, we still don't have a cure for this, that, and the other, but you can do this, this, and this. It just makes me second guess. I'll never be the same after that. And especially them losing my samples and having called those one of them our baby back then, totally uncalled for.
I mean, they just messed up like everywhere.
Correct. And that was my thing, is like, okay, they're clearly negligent in this. Where can I get some help? Now I'm not just sad and grieving, but I am darn right angry, because I feel like at least, and I said, I don't care if the odds were in my favor. If it's 1 in a million, I want that 1 in a million.
Well, right. I mean, it feels like they took whatever chance you had away from you.
Yeah. And I said, how do you think a wound that you have unattended is going to get? I mean, our body does heal itself, yes, but I mean, it's going to get worse or infected. And so I was clearly, at least just looking back now at the whole story, when I was told I had a miscarriage, I was just high risk. I never lost it. I needed more care, not less care. And I am forever certain that things would be different. I don't know how. It doesn't mean that he would have even stayed in full term. But we were at 20 weeks, and at least by research, I mean, it's very rare, but even at 22 or 23 weeks, they are viable outside of, they could be put into an incubator or whatever. And even after everything I'd went through and still presented myself at the hospital with having had my water broke and everything, it's risky even at that time, but you can try to replenish that water. Or had I known way back when that I still was pregnant, I would have went to the hospital that moment that that gushing happened, not 5 days later. So there would have been ways to, by knowing I never lost it initially, I would have known what to do in those moments. I would have known what was coming. I mean, not exactly, but I would know there's still a baby in there. I need to get seen right now.
Right.
And I'm very certain that something would be different. Doesn't matter what. But the point is that I didn't have the opportunity to do any of those number of things, to be seen by any number of people that I may have been seen by, to give it that chance, at least to get to a viable stage. We're not even talking full term, but a chance to have had him come out breathing. And because we were so close to that, I mean, it just continued to make me angry, which is why I had to find some way to find justice for that, or at least look into it, because nobody that had heard about it seemed to think that that was normal. They're like, oh yeah, I've gone through miscarriages, but here's what's not that they should be normal, but
Right. I mean, nothing about your experience was like it was supposed to be.
correct. Yeah. And it was just like, it's not right. But of course, there was dead end after probably easily 80 contacts, because I did that every day for about a year. Had a list and told the story, and it just became like, of how many times I'd went through it. And of course there was no justice from it, and no answers. And so later into that summer, like June or July, I'd gotten pathology back from everything that came out during his birth, and all results came. She says it was only a one-liner too. It just says your baby had normal genetic makeup. So even processing that and thinking back when we were both in the clinic the day that she told us we'd had the miscarriage, by looking at the clots and presuming that maybe he had an issue, chemically or something like that, or that for whatever other reason on my end. Nope. I mean, all genetics were normal. So now what? You were saying we each had a problem. Well, that's clearly another guess that was wrong. So why couldn't this baby live, other than the fact that I probably put my body under so much stress as a high risk person? I mean, a person carrying a high risk like pregnancy, and that I simply didn't get care. I'm very certain it's tied to the lack of care here. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, definitely. I agree with you.
if it had normal genetic makeup, that's what also was like, okay, if there had been an issue or somewhere, or a disconnect, I mean, doesn't make you love them any less or want them here on this earth any less. It just would have made more sense why it might not have been strong enough or something. But the fact that even up till when they started inducing me at the hospital, he was moving around. He had a heartbeat of normal range. And the fact that my body had kind of decided it was going to be time, that's the only reason he had to come out. And I'm forever certain that it had something to do with just being under stress, because I'd had some kind of wound or just sensitivity back then, right? Which is why I had bled. But it doesn't mean that you can't have a normal pregnancy after bleeding. I mean, I think it's pretty normal ish. I mean, it's just.
Right. It happens. Yeah. But
Um,
man, I'm so sorry that, your experience was the way it was. I mean,
mhm.
and that you couldn't even get any justice for it.
No. And it just became like well, as I also mentioned earlier, that it just was hard, well, for both of us, but it was hard. Just, I can speak for myself, that because I was in a position right there that, I gained and lost this little person that was coming and not coming and coming. But then the way that my partner had handled it afterwards, how it kind of, men and women, or just even just different people process it differently, how much of a toll it took on him in order just to kind of function, well, because he was the one to see it come out. Like, when it was born, I was, my head's up here and I'm got my eyes closed and just processing getting him out and all that. But he'd seen different things than I'd seen. And I can never imagine how that felt. And so that put a wedge kind of between us as far as like, we're not looking for a home anymore and all that stuff, because it's like we literally just have to step back and heal as people. Because if we're not people, whole people, at least somewhat, we're not, we can't be for each other in the way that we should be, or at least in a way that won't destroy us later, and so he needed that time and I respected that to just heal. It's enough to make you sick, like just that your body goes through this weak period and anything that comes at you, it was too much. you know
Right. Like we never know how we're gonna, react to that until we're put in that situation.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, they could prepare you for anything. And I never did take, what is it, not advantage of, but I never did go through the counseling. I didn't, it didn't, I mean, it was unbearable, but it was bearable. I mean, I knew I was, must be built to handle this, and I certainly just don't. I mean, the last person you want to go see is the team of, or at least the institution that helped you get here to this moment. I sort of was, that's the last resort of anyone I would want to talk to, because they're going to be biased in some way, because they're, however they're protected under, with what they can offer as medical, right, people, as opposed to holistic healing or spirit. Well, and it was a Catholic hospital. I mean, but even then, some of the options just, I mean, and that might be too technical, but I thought, well, just even kind of the protocols that they went through, at least offered me, being a Catholic hospital, just kind of didn't jive with me too. It just, some of those ideals didn't go. And I just felt like the ball was really missed on a number of occasions, and they still stood by it, just saying nothing we could do differently. And I'm just like, but please tell me, how do you think that? How are you so sure when I can point out any number of ways without a degree, only having just research, that it's so very possible to, you know, to get through these pregnancies that are tough and still keep that baby inside. And, at one point she had said, you're not, you're not so fragile as people think. I mean, unless you're doing something like skydiving, you're not, pregnancies are okay to be active with. And my partner, he says, I'll always remember that one, for her to say, unless you're doing skydiving, pretty much anything else goes. And I'm thinking, even high risk, even somebody who should be on bed rest shouldn't be doing anything such as getting out of a car, making food deliveries, not getting enough sleep because they're grieving and doing all this. I said, that's not something the body should be going through or experiencing as a high risk. It doesn't need to be anything as strenuous as skydiving. It could be simply getting up in the morning, can be too much for somebody who needs a lot of care.
Was your
And
doctor like a new doctor or had they been a doctor a while? Do you know?
correct. They've been practicing for 30, 40 years.
Oh, really? And
Yeah,
still
she's
said all that.
correct. And oh, and the other thing too, which was a follow up to the hospital. So May, June, it was somewhere in June where I'd kind of had my final kind of follow up to the birthing. And now we know for sure there's nothing in there, right? Because we've just now, he's been born. We're now discussing, okay, this is really the time now where you can take the counseling and the grieving. And I'm thinking, how are we here twice, in this grieving process, the offering of counseling? But anyway, so like during that appointment, she had said, how are you feeling after all of this? And it was like, gee, I'm going to be, I'm very respectful. I mean, I'll be honest and hold someone accountable, but I'm not rude. I'm not a person to blast people, or it's just not my thing, because I feel like somewhere down the line, it's not of my duty or something I want to give up my peace of mind for, to quote unquote like punish somebody, right? I figured that'll be taken care of who somewhere later, I don't know, by someone else, not by me. All I can do is point out facts and point out that it wasn't right. And I hope to, at least make someone aware of that. That shouldn't ever happen again. It won't change my story, but that, I mean, it wasn't, it's all just normal stuff that should have happened. Check up this, check up that, do this test, do that test, whatever it takes. And she had told me to not dwell. And I'll also always remember that, because I thought, how do you not want me to dwell? I lost my baby, somewhere down the line. And then fast forward, and now he's there, and I've now birthed him. And I'm not in the least bit like confused and angry. I said, I am not just grieving, but I am angry now. I'm not dwelling. I am angry. And I feel like I've been robbed of my rights to try. Right. I don't care what any of the results would have been. I wanted it all. And then if it comes to that, okay, then I've done everything I could. But I feel like, because I simply didn't know, even at 5 months, like I felt full and my pants felt tight, but it was not obvious that I was still carrying a baby. I thought I was just not healing properly. And I was probably, had some inflammation going on, or who knows. Just for reference, I'm 5'1" and about 108 pounds or so. So I'm short and petite and all that. And I also don't get like super, super big, right, to at that point. And so I just felt like, there's something a little off. If I'd made it to like 6 or 7 months, then probably, yeah, I would have figured it out. But still, by that point, it was not super obvious. Yeah. So, just being told not to dwell on it, with that, well, I'm not dwelling like because I can't get over it, but I said, there's work to be done. I feel like my job with this is unfinished, because, well, you've taken my opportunity to have all the options. I'm going to find options that at least could try to justify it. I don't know. I never was able to, even doing my research and presenting it, kind of working as a team too, to make sure that in case they never thought of anything, well, how about this? How about this? And no answers came from it. So, needless to say, we had him cremated. And after that day, I stayed Friday night, Saturday night, and I left Sunday. Oh, that's the other thing too, quickly, is that the day I was going to get discharged, and I had been on several rounds of antibiotics and stuff like that to ensure that I wasn't going to get this intrauterine infection that they talked about and all that. They had said that your iron levels are borderline 6, so 7-6, and they said that that's like anemic. And so they wanted me to go on like an hour and a half drip of iron before I left. And that's my other thought. And so, now at this time, I look back at all that and I think, okay, so going with like the idea that, oh, there's nothing we could have done differently, or even where we didn't do anything technically wrong. Well, so that time, I figure your iron levels in your blood is kind of related, right? So when was the time I lost so much blood? Not during the birth. I didn't lose a ton of blood during the birth, actually, but back in March, when I'd supposedly had the miscarriage, and I was never treated properly for a miscarriage or for any fluid loss at all. I wasn't treated for any of that. That my iron levels hadn't been low since then, maybe. And that also could have contributed to, because I was feeding my baby, right? While he was still there, those couple of months without care, I was probably anemic back then too.
Right. And they never even tested or did anything.
No. And that could have influenced my body becoming weak and eventually my water breaking. See, and that's something I admire about our boy, is that even without all of that care, and up till the moment I had to give birth to him, he was still strong. Like that he had, without care, had made it that far. And simply by the fact that my water had broken, that he had to be born, he himself was so strong. or at least as per normal for that stage in pregnancy. And I admired that, thinking, wow, obviously something went awry with me, and it didn't get attention properly. How is that still maybe not influenced by the fact that my iron levels had been so low, and among other things, right? But it was just odd that I was treated for that at the hospital, thinking, well, I've never been that low. I think my iron levels are generally like a 9, which they're on the little low end, but not low enough that I've ever. Well, when I was a kid, I had to be on a supplement, but it wasn't really necessary. And so I've never been a 6, and thought, well, I probably lost it then. Who knows? And just all these pieces have never made sense to me.
Right.
And
I mean, it's just, yeah, it's kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around
it
about
is.
like, did this really happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, exactly. And so yeah, he was cremated, and then I have a charm which can't see, but there's a little hummingbird charm on my necklace, and that has some of the ash in it. And then I have one of the little footprint impressions on a charm as well, and I wear that every day. And then
That's beautiful.
we had thought of trying to spread the ash on a hike, figuring that for him to truly be free, but we I never could let it go. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to keep him trapped in a little box either, but I made like a little altar on my bookshelf that has all the ultrasound images, his footprints, the measure tape, because he was born at 320 grams and 10 and a quarter inches long, and yeah, 20 weeks gestation. So anyway, I kept all the things, had his feet casted, die cast. And so a lot of times I'll look at it and try to process it, and of course it's just the feet, so I'm just trying to imagine, man, he was all there. Well, and I did see him. I did do a full viewing because I couldn't face it in the hospital. I mean, I could rub his little feet, and I held him and his head and everything like that, but I couldn't. I think at that time I was just in so much shock, I couldn't bear to actually look. I mean, I just didn't know what I was going to see, right? Because it's
Right.
not going to be what you think or what you might expect, at 40 weeks or 38 or something like that. So I was very terrified, but I knew that I had the option before he was cremated to view him entirely, and so which I did, because I was able to process it then, and it wasn't scary at all. It was all there, and come to find out in research that at 12 to 13 weeks, everything is there. They've developed everything, fingernails and eyelashes and all that stuff, even their little like sperm for later. They've already got everything they need as humans. They just need to obviously grow bigger. And, so then just looking back too at when I supposedly lost him the first time, I was about 3 months. And to imagine even then, wow, he'd had everything he ever needed in life. And how there's they can be a little clot or a little so tiny, but they're ever so meaningful because they've got everything they need, and they're your baby no matter how old, in there.
Right.
And it forever changed me, of course, because while he's not here, I've never been the same, whether it be in good ways or bad ways. I mean, I second guess everything, I research everything. I mean, and not just, not you go to the credible sites and,
Right.
and at least bring something. When I go to a doctor and they tell me something, I have things ready to discuss with them that go along with that, because the first thing they're going to want to prescribe is something, and I'm like, no, there's ways to do it. Our body's meant to do it, and we're going to try. If we can't, then that's when medication. I don't know. Everybody has a different view on it, but I'm like, let your body do what it needs to rather than depend on something. And I mean, if it comes to that, then fine. But I'm not so quick to just be, I am a person, and I'm not a number or a meal ticket or just an appointment that they don't have time for to see all of me and that kind of thing. It's like, you have to be half the doctor that you see, because they don't have time for all of us to get to know us, to know everything we need. It's just going to be like, well, what's the gist? What's the surface of it? Let's just take care of it with this one size fits all thing. And, and that's how I felt like they treated me with this whole process of just not checking me, not giving me all the options that they may have given someone else. And it's like, okay, you might think and especially those that have multiple children and they're like going through this. It's like my reminder would always be just always guess them. You can never check too much, And I even thought, man, when I was feeling bloated back then, I even mentioned we were laying down and I had even said, gosh, what if I took a pregnancy test? And then I thought, no, I'm in denial. That'd be crazy. They've told us we lost our baby. And I look back and I thought, what if I had? Because it would have come out positive and I would have known sooner than when I went into the doctor. But the fact that I even remotely thought about it, and then I said, you know what? I guess that's part of denial, is that you want to make sure, but they did say what they said. And at that time, who am I to second guess them? I mean, of course, it took that experience for me to learn that, yeah, you do. They don't walk on water. They are people, right? And where they've learned most of their stuff is books. I'm
Right.
not a book, I'm not you have to do tests. I mean, it's just, so I've not much found a ton of peace with that, that can still happen to people, that they simply just, it's not that the tools aren't available, but they choose not to use them, or they're so lax or so confident in their studies that, I mean, she's been practicing that many years and made a huge mistake. A huge.
Right. Yeah.
I have not seen her since. She still practices, but I just have made
Yeah,
every
I would
effort.
not have gone back.
No, no, it's just like, I'll go elsewhere. I just, and at one point during that last summer too of 22, that someone from their quality management had called me. I think it was the end of August, so this was months after, had left me a couple of voicemails about wanting to chat about my experience and whatever. And I think I finally called him back and had said, so about this, what's your goal with it? I said, just before I even invest time in it, what's your goal? He says, well, just so that we can make it better for someone else. And I said, so that's going to be my mission going forward from my perspective and my right. You work for the hospital. So I think right now, and still even at that time, I was not interested in talking with anyone at the hospital. Everyone does have, points to make, I'm sure, but they were the last party I wanted to converse with. Also by the fact that, yes, I want to help. I would hope to help someone. I don't know how, I just had this high hope that somehow, an unfiltered way, not from a medical perspective, but just from a person who has experienced it, what could I do to help someone? And still don't know if there's a way I could. I just thought there's a million things I could do, I suppose. I just don't know what and where.
Well, I think just, sharing your story is really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I figured, and which is, especially if there was someone else that went through something like that too, what did they receive or not receive? What was their lack of like care? Where did they fall short with the process, or did theirs get to survive? Did they get offered all the things that I didn't? That's what I was curious about, is like that it would help someone else maybe not feel alone, but then also maybe help bring any kind of, just, since I couldn't find anyone, I thought maybe someone could find me too. And so that was a thought.
Well, I do want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story.
Absolutely. It's amazing when you get into the story that it seems so fast and short, but it's quite long. And that's with all the most of the emotion taken out of it too. It's all just like, here's what happened. It's not even then including, all the feels too, which they're hard to put into words, especially they take different form as time goes on. I mean, it still hurts, but it takes different form. So
Well, is there any parting words you want to add?
just And the last thing we did name him Angel, which was, and then he took our last names as well. But initially, when we lost him, we gave him that name because we didn't know the gender at the time, being 12 weeks. And then after he's born, it's a boy. So we said, wow, I guess that it's a name I think that can fit a girl or a boy too. But
Yeah,
it just
definitely.
even made cooler sense to leave it at that. So yeah, I'm glad that for the short amount of time, glad in a sense that I'm glad I had him versus never. I feel like I'm a better and a different person because of him in many ways.
Well, thank you again for coming on today and sharing with us.
Absolutely. And thank you for your time and rescheduling and all that with me.
Thank you so much, Maegan, for sharing your story with us. I'm just so angry at how much the medical system and your doctors failed you and continue to fail so many women. To not even do any testing and to completely blow you off is just, there are honestly just no words. It's so unfortunate how often women get pushed aside or treated as a, quote, first time mom, basically saying we're just over worrying and that nothing's wrong. But many episodes of this show have shown the importance of advocating for ourselves and have shown that in many cases we do know when something is not right with our baby or our body. What will it take to get doctors to take us seriously? I really don't know the answer to this, but I truly wish I knew what to do to solve this issue. I do think that continuing to share our stories and educating others on what to look out for and the importance of advocating for ourselves is a step in the right direction. If your story helps just one person know the signs to look out for, or helps them know it's okay to speak up for themselves, then I think it's more than worth it. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.